Hello, everyone. I am honored to moderate this important conversation in the How We Did It series by the Overseas Press Club. The conversation today, as Patty said, will focus on Sandy Tolan and Euclides Cordero Nuel's investigation, the bitter work behind sugar, which revealed the abuses Haitian workers endure in sugarcane harvesting camps in the Dominican Republic. With information from visits to 10 work camps, also known as bateys, and more than 100 interviews, as well as numerous documents from government agencies and lawsuits, the reporting team traced sugar from the Dominican Republic to American ports and to the supply chain of some major brands in the US, such as Domino and Hershey. The report was a probe into Central Romana Corporation, a privately held sugar producing company partially owned by a prominent Cuban-American family, the Fanjuls. The story shows how the Fanjuls built a global sugar empire through a secretive web of holding companies, partnerships, and affiliates, including a major importer of sugar into the United States. The reporting, which prompted scrutiny from Congress and also the Department of Labor, documented workers earning $4 a day wages, having a staggering debt, facing substandard housing, and really having a very difficult time accessing any kind of medical care. All of this while helping build the company's profits. Now let me introduce briefly our distinguished speakers. Sandy Tolan is here with us. He's a radio and print journalist and the author of 3 books. Euclides Cordero Nuel, let me make sure he hasn't joined us yet, but he will join us very soon. He's facing a situation in his country, but Euclides is an independent journalist based in the Dominican Republic. And with us today is Michael Montgomery, who is a senior producer for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, and also had a very important role in this story as executive producer of the Reveal piece. What else? So the format today for this conversation, I will kick it off with our 3 guests. And after about 25-30 minutes, we'll open up for questions from you. So I encourage you to please send your questions in the chat. We would love to hear your thoughts, your input at the time of the Q&A. So without further ado, I will start with you, Sandy. And I guess my first question is the backstory. So what are the origins of this investigation? Can you tell us how it all started?
Thank you. And Euclides is trying to join us now. And just a note to one of our colleagues, Chad, if you can possibly reach out to him, he might need a little help. He's trying to join right now. So yes, thank you. First of all, thank you to OPC. It's good to be here with my colleague and soon my other colleague with Michael and soon Euclides and Marina. Thanks so much for doing this. And thank you, Patricia, for the introduction. So this story actually had origins in the early 1990s when several partners and I produced a series called Vanishing Homelands for NPR. And my colleague Alan Wiseman and I traveled to the Dominican Republic to look at the situation involving sugarcane cutters back in that time. The situation was so terrible then that I'd scarcely ever seen anything like it. There were child workers, in their early teens or even younger. Some had been kidnapped. There were people, grown-ups and children, locked behind gates, being protected by armed guards and essentially forced to cut sugarcane. It was hardly distinguishable from slavery, and the conditions were absolutely horrific. The amount of money the people made, they were getting $1 a ton at the time per ton of raw cane that they cut. And so during that time, I met a child. My partner Alan and I met a child named Lulu Pierre, who was 14 years old at the time and had been he'd been kidnapped on the border and forced to cut cane. And it was really such an appalling situation that, it was one of those moments when, as a journalist, you are confronted with something beyond journalism and you sort of have to decide what to do. And we saw a situation where we might be able to help by giving this translator, this Catholic brother from Canada, some money to help get him home. We never found out what happened to Lulu Pierre. And we went on to interview the US ambassador, and we produced our story in the early 90s. And I never found out what happened. In all those years, for almost 30 years, I was haunted by the memory of this child that was kidnapped and wondering what would happen to him. So one day, finally, after almost 30 years in the early 2019, I decided to go back and find out. And that's when I met this remarkable man named Euclides Cordero Nuel, who who I'm so happy to see on the screen right now. And we began to work together. Our first our first assignment essentially was to try to find out what happened to Euclides and see if we could, to Lulu Pierre, and see if we could actually do a story about what happened to him. Long story short, spoiler alert, we didn't find him. We have not yet found him. And we were coming back to a place where I hadn't been since Euclides himself, who can tell you more about how he was raised, but he was only 2 years old the first time I was there. And we didn't find Lulu, but what we did find was a story of continuing appalling conditions. Despite the improvements, the situation facing Haitian sugarcane cutters remains quite appalling, and we could get into those details as we go forward.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and welcome, Euclides. We're so happy you are with us today. I already introduced you briefly before you arrived, but I would like to ask you now what it was like for you to work on this story, to be invited by Sandy to join this reporting team, having having been raised in one of these campsites and having worked in the sugarcane fields yourself when you were younger. What was it like to work on the story?
Hello?
Hello. Hi, did you hear the question?
I'm sorry for the delay, but I was very challenging to log in. That's why I
No
had
problem.
to download the I had it before downloaded, but it's asked me to download again, and I had to wait and all of that. I want to say sorry for that.
No problem at all. We are already live and we are going on with this webinar. We're so glad you joined. Did you have a chance to hear the question I asked you about? What was your experience like of working on this story that in some ways was so personal to you or to your personal history?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. And good afternoon. My name is Euclides Cordero Nuel. I'm a journalist from the Dominican Republic. Uh, I want to start by saying that it was a honor to me uh, to be working with in this investigation about the country's sugar industry, because it's a subject that has been very tight or explored in a journalistic term. Because of the enormous power of the economic and political influence that the sugar company has in Dominican Republic today. Not today, but year by years, for generation, I can say.
Exactly.
So when I met Sandy Tolan in May 2019 in Santo Domingo, and he told me about the Lulu history. As a skinny boy who had been kidnapped in the northern of the border in Dominican Republic in Haiti and Dajabon, exactly the location where he was kidnapped. Working with the machete, he did not know exactly how to throw the machete into the cane. He doesn't know how to cut the cane, and Sandy was very passionate in the at the time he was telling me that, and I get I get so that touched me very deep, and um, to hear that because I thought about me in that moment about my when I was when I was a child in the Bate growing up and working in the once for the with the machete in the cane field that I had a remind in that time about the situation.
There was
So
probably nobody better positioned than you, Euclides, to do this work and to do this important reporting. So I'm so glad that you and I'm so glad that you and Sandy connected. And Sandy, so from what you and Euclides have said, you know, the initial focus was on Lulu Pierre, but then that didn't pan out, and your story shift as it happens to so many journalists in the field. Was that a hard shift? Was it a natural, organic thing that allowed you to tackle the more systemic story?
exactly, because in the very energetic narrative of Sandy Tolan, I saw like I made a flashback when I was growing up in the Batey and said, oh, that could be me too also, and um and I also remind when I was about to be done with my high school to study in the university because I was thinking about to study anthropology, and I was 1 year in the university studying anthropologist, and after that I decided to study a uh, um, uh, journalism because it's what I feel inside of me, doing like talking to the people and write histories and work with the for histories of and the way Sandy have I can say Sandy has been at the same time professor for me on the ground because he have a very a powerful energy, and I think people get very open wide to talk with us when when we ask the people to talk about the situation because they feel they could change something. It's a little thing, but
Yeah.
something could change if they talk to us. So finally, on our exploration looking for Lulu, we could not find Lulu, and yeah. However, Sandy realized that a little have changed since he was here in 91 and began to work on an idea for this research. I was also very interested in working on because I know it was a way to publicize the difficulties that the situation of the workers in this family and this and working in the sugarcane plantation. And
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that
Euclides, let me just add to this if I can. The
uh,
the the emphasis that we had was always to try to see if we could find Lulu, but also not simply to have a retrospective piece and what happened to this person that I happened to meet 30 years ago, but
exactly,
what's
yes.
the difference now?
Mhm.
And clearly
Uh-huh.
there have been differences, there have been improvements, There isn't, the amount of people who are children who are working in the fields or people who are being locked up and literally forced to cut sugarcane has diminished sharply. But the conditions that, one of the things that we did as we pivoted and as we, worked very closely together, as colleagues, side by side, with Euclides' experience, without it, I would have never been able to get the story that we together produced with Michael and with our colleagues. So it was at some point when we realized we're probably not going to find Lulu, then we went deeper into the story, the part of the story we were already going to do, which is looking at this vast plantation in the Dominican Republic, which is almost 250,000 acres and is largely owned and controlled by this family in Florida, these sugar barons in Florida, very wealthy, who's by some estimates, the family earns more than $100 million a year in profits. And we're finding these workers who are paid $4 a day, who have these insurmountable debt schemes, who are absolutely trapped in poverty. I've been all over the world. I've reported in 40 some countries, and I've never seen conditions. I mean, I'm talking about Gaza and places like that are worse than the Haitian workers, these people who are really good, hardworking, strong people, but who have so many disadvantages. And so once we began to see that, Euclides and I traveling throughout this vast plantation of Central Romana, we realized that this is really where the story is. Even if we don't find Lulu Pierre, and I'm determined someday to go back with Euclides and look again. But right now, the fact that we found this other story and what's happening now remains so relevant.
Sandy, thank you for that. And we'll talk more about the challenges you both faced in the field and the decisions you had to make. I want to bring in Michael and ask you, Michael, as an editor and executive producer for the Reveal piece, what were your initial concerns when you got this pitch? Did you immediately buy into it, or did you have some hesitations?
Yeah, so I edited this and was sort of a co-producer with Sandy. I was not the executive producer, but it's one of those things where obviously Sandy and Euclides were developing powerful stories with these cane cutters and their families who live in these work camps, these bateys. These are Haitians, people who've come from Haiti, so they're migrants. They're extremely at risk. So just getting to that point was extremely difficult and showed how good Sandy and Euclides were at developing trust and all that. The issue, though, I think beyond Lulu Pierre was they were developing, examples or anecdotes of this situation. And what we were interested in is trying to connect this back to the United States, where a lot of the sugar is exported to, as Sandy, you referred to at the top, brands like Domino and Hershey. It feeds into their supply chains. And that makes this story very important because it connects all of us to these abuses. The key thing, just to sort of fast forward, the key thing in Sandy's reporting was he was able to develop information that US government officials were aware of the situation, not only aware of the situation, but they believed, or there was information that suggests that US officials believed that the company that really was the worst performer in this in terms of a failure to implement reforms was this Central Romana Corporation. So once we figured out, okay, there is information inside government that's going to corroborate these findings on the ground, that to me was key. And as you mentioned, we eventually, through a lawsuit, the Department of Labor got our hands on some of those documents, which exactly corroborated what Sandy and Euclides were finding.
And Michael, in the effort to create like a really solid backbone of documents and data for this investigation, you also took another approach, which was quite fascinating to me, which is you created a survey that I understand Euclides and others did, in the bateys, even before some of the field reporting began. Can you tell us about that decision? Because I think that can be something that other journalists can learn from.
Right. I mean, and this was really Sandy and Euclides' work and their idea. But how do you create a data set if you're not really going to have access to government data? I mean, one of the problems here is these areas are neglected by the government of Dominican Republic. So there isn't a lot of data, or certainly not a lot of government data that we could get our hands on. And so with some help from some experts on forced labor, Sandy and Euclides put together a questionnaire, an informal survey, which I think was really important in getting, Sandy, you take it from here, 50 people, 50 cane cutters who helped us hit certain notes. Like there's a whole criteria that International Labor Organization puts together about forced labor. And through those surveys, we saw that, for example, debt was a huge issue, debt that these people couldn't get out of, medical issues, exposure to pesticides, herbicides. So that really helped us see a more systemic picture of these abuses.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, one of the things that was most striking, it was a few days before I was going to be coming out to join Euclides, and he and another colleague, I think you all went to like at least 7 different, maybe more than that, different bates, and I think, as I recall, met with 48 different people. And so what this, first of all, it was almost like a pre-reporting. It was a pre-reporting to figure out where we were going to go and who we were going to talk to, but also to see what was the emphasis that we needed to. This is my 3rd trip. This was going to be my 3rd trip. We were trying to nail it down. And all of a sudden what came up was, from one of our themes was almost everyone was in debt. And the debt scheme was unbelievable almost. They are paying interest rates of 500% per year. And this is common. It is not run by Central Romana. That's an important distinction. But nevertheless, it's run by local loan sharks as a side business. We interviewed, remember Euclides, we interviewed a fireman, who had the side business of 500% interest. I mean, it's how people make money, but what it means is that some of the human rights reports, it underscores this point that these folks, these amazing, hardworking Haitian people who work in the sun all day and don't have electricity or running water, or even enough food to eat, they're trapped. They're trapped in debt. I don't know if you want to add. Go ahead, Marina. Go ahead.